So,
Okay.
are we good to start? Yeah. Okay.
Yep. Off you go.
So, my name is Monica Anderson. I am a Widening Participation Officer at the University of Glasgow, and I will be presenting our paper today with my colleague Kirsten Henry, who's the top-up programme coordinator. I think Kirsten is somewhere there.
Yeah.
Brilliant. So one thing I would like to point out just at the beginning of this presentation is while it's myself and Kirsten who are presenting this, this is very much a collection of all the work that's being done across the Widening Participation team at the University of Glasgow. So it's very much a representation of the collective work and not just what we're doing. So I do want to just give out a shout out to the team because it is very much a team effort at the University of Glasgow. So really what we're going to be looking at today is the impact that the current pandemic has had on our current widening participation students, focusing in particular on the vulnerable student groups that we work with, but also looking at the impact that it's having on our widening participation applicants. So in the short term, looking at those who are looking at 2020 entry, but also looking a bit further down the line in the coming years, and then looking at what our response to that has been. So how are we trying to mitigate all the kind of negative impacts that this can have on our current students, but also on our future applicants, and looking through case studies at what we've been doing for each of our widening participation programs to try and mitigate those negative circumstances. So in terms of the impact on current students, a lot of these are impacts that are kind of universal to all university students. So, but there are some issues that are going to be more impactful on WP students just because of the makeup of the cohort. So there's additional economic pressures. So a lot of widening participation students rely on part-time work in order to be able to support themselves throughout their studies. And a lot of the work that is available to students, unfortunately, is the work that has been most impacted upon by the current pandemic. So things like hospitality, retail. So a lot of them have lost work or had massively reduced hours. So there's additional economic pressures that these students are facing. And we've really seen that with the number of students who have been accessing our crisis fund since the lockdown began. So it is something that is a really big impact on our student cohort. There's also the isolation and the impact on mental health, which again, this is something that is across the board, but because WP students will have the additional pressures of losing work, of not being sure how to finance themselves, that is going to have a bigger impact on them. But the one that is probably most relevant to the conversation today is the ability to access online content and remote exams. A lot of the students that we work with, this has been an issue for them because they rely on the IT available on campus in order to be able to access these resources. So with the universities being locked down and everybody having to work from home, a lot of them are really struggling to access these, and most of them are actually relying on their phones. So we have quite a few students who are doing final assessments, things through their phone, because that is the only way that they can access online content. And then there's specific vulnerable student groups that we work with that have kind of even more individualized needs. So I'm one of the name points of contacts at the University for student carers. And in addition to the kind of pressures faced by all students, they have the additional stress of the people that they're caring for are often the ones who are most vulnerable and most at risk. So that is adding a huge amount of emotional stress, but it's also increasing their caring responsibilities because they're having to balance that with their studies. But a lot of the time they're losing access to the support systems that allow them to balance their studies with those caring responsibilities in the first place. So we've had a lot of students who are really struggling to manage that. Another group that we work with are care experienced and estranged students. So Kirsten is one of the name points of contacts for that group. So I don't know, Kirsten, do you want to talk about kind of the issues that these students have been facing in the current pandemic?
Yep, so as Monica's just kind of highlighted, a lot of our students that fall under the care experience and estranged kind of remit is that they're finding it financially very difficult. And I've had a few very difficult conversations with students who are also having to be at home with family members who are, you know, really affecting their mental health and the issues that cause the student to be estranged in the first place have kind of doubled. So there's lots of issues around that, and it's the isolation mainly as well. The just feeling that the networks that are usually available, the in-person face-to-face contact that's usually available, isn't necessarily there. So and we've, yeah, it's up on the slide there, but issues with private accommodation as well, so real uncertainty. They might be the only person left behind in a flat that usually has 3 or 4 other people in it, and how they're going to be able to finance that, and just tensions around that kind of stuff as well. So there's been some quite complex, quite difficult, quite challenging issues for that particular student cohort.
Another cohort of students that we work with that have really been impacted by the current situation are refugee and asylum seeking students. Asylum seeking students are already in quite a difficult financial situation because they can't rely on public funds, so this is really making that situation a lot more difficult. And refugee students again are relying on part-time work to support themselves, and again that's becoming more difficult, and with a lot of them losing work. Another issue here again is that the accommodation they're often in doesn't have access to IT. They can't have or they don't have reliable internet connections. So again, there is that problem of, well, how do I access online content? How do I do my exams online if I don't have those? And there's a lot of anxiety as well from the fact that a lot of legal proceedings about leave to remain have been stalled or delayed because of this. So again, that's adding to that emotional stress, the pressure around it, and also the fact that isolation can be a really big issue because a lot of the support networks that they have in place, again, they can't access because of the current situation. So these are just some of the impacts that the current situation has had on our current students, but it also is going to impact on the applicants that are going to be coming in. So the impact that we kind of see on future applicants with the cancellation of the SQA exam diet. The S6 exam diet is incredibly important for WP applicants. The adjusted entry requirements at Glasgow for our WP applicants, we don't have an S5 minimum for most subjects, because we know that those students usually need S5 and S6 to achieve the required hires. So these students really did have a lot riding on this exam diet, and really nobody in the country knows what these predicted grades are going to look like. It's a huge amount of uncertainty, and especially that this is the group that's potentially going to be most disadvantaged by predicted grades, because the SQA have said that they are going to look at the attainment from a school and their in previous years, and a lot of WP applicants come from schools where maybe the attainment isn't really high, and these are the high achievers in that school. So are they going to be disadvantaged by that? Again, this is something that we're not really sure about, but it could potentially impact on the grades that they will achieve this year. There's disruption to college exams, and we know that a lot of WP applicants come in through the college route, so again that's having an impact. But the school closures are having a massive impact on our future applicants. The home environment for some WP applicants is not the best environment to be in. School was the one kind of safe space that they had. It's where they can study, it's where they can concentrate, it's where they do have access to IT, and that's been taken away from them. So there is going to be an impact on that. The fact they're also out of education for an extended period of time, is that going to have an impact on future retention? Is that going to have an impact on how they cope when they do transition into university? And again, that idea of accessing IT, even if schools are putting up loads of resources online, even if teachers are managing to provide that, if you're in a home environment where you can't access that, we've already spoken to some of our students who are parents where maybe they've got 3 kids plus themselves, and they're all trying to access online resources with one phone and a laptop. You know, that's going to be a struggle. And what impact is that going to have on the attainment gap in the long run, where you will have students who are maybe disadvantaged in terms of what access they have at home and how much support they have in their home environment in terms of continuing with their studies and accessing all the kind of online content that schools have put together. And there's been a massive disruption to our widening participation programs. Because of the lockdown, we have had to cancel several of our in-school sessions, but it's also had a really, really big disruption on the on-campus activity that we had planned. Really, this time of the year is when we have most of our on-campus activity, and we do a lot of our transitional activity for our WP applicants. So it's had a really big impact in terms of that, and later on we're going to talk about kind of how we're trying to mitigate that for each of the WP programs that we run. So what has our response been? Kind of generally looking at what we've tried to do in terms of admissions, we work really closely with admissions at the University of Glasgow. So we have tried to change some of our admissions procedures to reflect the current situation. We also work really closely with our local authority contacts and our school contacts. So some of them have been in touch and have asked us for extra resources, and whenever we can, we do provide any of that. So having those really close relationships with local authorities and schools has been really beneficial at this time, because it means that we can support them as much as we can. In terms of retention, we are looking at increasing our retention activity in the next academic term. So we are looking at extended inductions, which will include new students taking part in our online summer school program, and I'll speak about that a little bit later on, but also our local student orientation, which is an event that we do the Friday before Fresher Week starts for our WP applicants. We're looking to extend that, so normally it would only be a day, but we are looking to make it a bit more intensive to make up for the current situation. But we've also been doing a lot of work by supporting our current students through the name point of contact. So like myself and Kirsten and our colleagues who work with the vulnerable student groups, we've tried to have proactive engagement with the students as much as possible, whether it's been phone calls or Zoom chats or email, just to be there and for them to have that point of contact at the university that can support them. We've been working really, really closely with the services across the university, so with financial aid, accommodation, advisors of studies, just to make sure that the appropriate support is in place for our students, and also acting in an advocacy role for students with landlords, local authorities, food banks, so really trying to support our most vulnerable students as much as we possibly can, as well as working with the SRC to make sure that students' circumstances were taken into consideration with remote exams and online course provision. And sometimes it's as simple as helping to find solutions where digital access is an issue. So there are several students where we have used the crisis fund to provide them with a laptop or a data dongle, something so they can access so they can physically do their exams, which are now online, or to access content. So that's kind of more generally what we've done in order to kind of try and mitigate those circumstances. But in terms of our widening participation programs, we really have looked at each program individually and seen what is the disruption here, and then tried to act to mitigate that as much as possible. So what we're going to do now is just kind of talk through each of our programs that's been disrupted and how we have managed that as a team. So the first program that had a really quite big disruption was our HNC articulation program. So these are HNCs that we run jointly with colleges in the Glasgow area, which allow entry into second year of a degree at the University of Glasgow. Now, the way that these articulation HNCs work is that the students spend some of the course on campus, on the University of Glasgow campus, and we had a week-long face-to-face course planned for the week beginning the 30th of March. Which of course didn't happen. So it was really looking, well, okay, well, what do we do during that week? What are the main skills? What are the things that we would want students to take away from that experience? And what we've tried to do is basically replicate it as much as possible with online resources. So all of the students on the HNC articulation programs have a GUID, so they have access to all of the GU resources. So our virtual learning environment, Moodle, student email, library e-resources. So we've tried to use that by hosting a lot of resources on Moodle and trying to replicate a lot of the activities they would have done that week there. So having recorded lectures, using interactive assessments, still getting them to submit coursework, submit essays, do a final exam, but doing all of these remotely. We've also tried to provide a lot of study guides and revision tools, as well as a regular office hour where they can still speak to someone about course content. We've also done an online Q&A forum with current second year students who went through the program last year, so there is someone that they can speak to. One of the things we've really tried to do when we've been looking at transferring on-campus activity online is to make sure that we are maintaining that element of human interaction, that it's not just a whole host of resources on Moodle where you don't get to speak to anyone, where there's no one where you get to ask questions. Is making sure that we are trying to keep as much of that in as possible, because we're all aware of the fact that there's no way to fully replicate on-campus experiences online, but trying to keep as much of that human element in it hopefully tries to replicate it as best as we possibly can. In addition, what we're in addition to the kind of online content, we're also going to be asking these students to complete a tailored version of our academic skills module, which I will speak about later on, but which was also quite a big part of the paper that we delivered as part of the December conference that took part in Edinburgh. And we're also going to be looking at more induction and orientation content, so that when we can get these students on campus, that we try and make up for anything that we really feel was missed out on by having to move all the content online. Our summer school is probably one of the areas where we've had the kind of biggest disruption. So for all of our MD20 applicants, a successful completion of our summer school is part of their adjusted entry requirements. And normally the way that our summer school is structured is that we've got students on campus for 4 weeks from mid-June to mid-July, where they complete 2 academic subjects plus an online study skills module. So of course we now can't run the on-campus part of the activity, but what we have found is that actually having the academic skills module, which we've now had in place since 2016, was a great starting point, because we already had the online content which we host on our virtual learning environment, Moodle. So really it was looking at that and saying, well, how do we replicate that for the academic subjects? And we've been working really, really closely with our academic subject partners across the university to help to replace that on-campus 4-week program with pre-recorded lectures or live lectures, webinars. So each academic subject is doing it slightly differently, but we've been working really closely with them to make sure that we can replicate as much of that content as possible. What we've also taken this as an opportunity to do, like we said, there's a lot of uncertainty when it comes to the SQA exams and predicted grades. So what we've said to some of our applicants is that if their condition, for example, is that they need to get 2 Bs at higher, if they successfully complete the summer school and they achieve 2 Bs in their academic grades, we will accept that in lieu of the 2 Bs at higher. So it's giving them a second chance to basically achieve the grades that they need to get into university, to try and mitigate the uncertainty over the predicted grades. But through that, we've actually expanded the program. So in a year when we're having to do the most work, we've seen the numbers for the program jump quite drastically. And just before we came into this, Kirsten and I were in a meeting talking about numbers, and usually we would have about 400 to 500 students on our summer school. We already have close to 700 registrations, and it does potentially look like we might reach the 1,000 mark this year. So yeah, it's actually, by going online, it's allowed us to expand it quite a bit. And like we said, we're opening it up to some of our MD20 applicants. So even if it's not part of their conditional offer, in order to help them with that transition, because they've missed so much of school, we've opened it up to them so they can do it as an optional thing rather than just doing it for those that's compulsory part of their offer to do that. We also run a Sutton Trust Summer School, which again is an on-campus week-long residential that we usually run in the first week of July, which again has been cancelled because of what's happening. But in this situation is working really closely with the Sutton Trust, because the Sutton Trust run these summer schools with lots of institutions across the UK. So this is something they've had to look at, not just with the University of Glasgow, but other universities as well. So they have their own online platform that they're working collaboratively with all the Sutton Trust summer school partners on, to create resources that all participants can access. And in addition to that, we're also creating resources that are specific to what we would have done on our Sutton Trust Summer School, and again hosting them on Moodle. In addition to that, all of the Sutton Trust participants are also going to do the academic skills module. So we're really looking again at having pre-recorded lectures, talking heads, lab tours, but also hosting a lot of activities of our current undergraduate mentors. So in a lot of our widening participation programs, we use former program participants as our undergraduate helpers, and this role is paid. So we're trying to use our undergraduates as much as possible, because it's also an opportunity for us to give them some employment during this time. So to try and help them mitigate the kind of circumstances of having lost a lot of their part-time work. So we are trying to use current undergraduate students as much as possible. We also have our REACH program, which works with S4 to S6 students who are interested in the medical professions, so medicine, dentistry, vet med, as well as law. Now, for the main part of that program is the on-campus week, which we do in June of their S5. So again, this is something that we've had to basically look at, well, how do we replicate what we would do in that week on campus, and how do we translate it into something online? So again, it's looking at using Moodle to replicate the key kind of elements of those activities with pre-recorded lectures, talks, video profiles from professionals from those areas, as well as live panels with students. So again, trying to maintain that element of human interaction and not just putting lots of resources online. We were debating a lot with the Reach Week about hosting a lot of live lectures, but this is actually where an area of accessibility kind of came in. And we realized, having worked with a lot of our students, that actually doing things live limits how many people can access it. Because if you do have someone who's maybe having to share a laptop or share one phone with siblings, with parents, if you say, well, we're going to have a lecture at 11 o'clock, that's going to limit the number of people that can access that. So we're using a lot of pre-recorded material and we're really opening up. So while normally it would have been a week, we're going to give students and participants a much longer time to access these resources so that they have as many opportunities as possible. But we are also having to look at the potential disruption that we're going to have to our in-school activity, because our S5 sessions usually start in October time. So we are having to look at, will we be able to send tutors to schools in October? And if we can't, how do we replace that? And what are the implications of that going to be? Another kind of thing that we had to deal with the REACH program is that the end of February and all the way throughout March is when we run our S4 school sessions. So about 50% of those sessions had to be cancelled, but luckily, in the previous academic term, we'd already developed an online version of those sessions for anybody who couldn't attend the in-school sessions. So we've just basically had to now use that on a much wider scale. So that was really a situation where we're really glad that we developed that the previous year so that we could just put that into place. We also have our Access Campus Day, which was meant to take place in June. As you can see, there's a reason why the WP team at Glasgow call it Jumping June, because literally we've got students on campus every single day. So there's a lot of activity that we've had to replace or postpone. But with the Access Campus Day, when we actually looked at what we do in that day, we decided that it would be better to just postpone it rather than try and replicate it, because there's a lot of interaction that happens on that day. So this was one of those situations where we actually looked at it and we thought it'd be better to do it in S6 when we actually can have that engagement, if possible, fingers crossed, then try and replicate it online just now. And the Access program runs alongside the REACH program, but it's for anybody who's interested in education, accountancy and finance and engineering. So similarly, the S4 sessions were interrupted with the lockdown in March, but again, we had that online provision that could replicate those in-school sessions. And we've supplemented that with online support as well. So the students have, or the participants have, our email address, and anything that's come up, we've been kind of actively engaging with them through that as well. And in some cases, we actually have taken this as an opportunity to look at our programs and restructure them completely. So in the first 2 weeks of June, we used to also run our S4 and S5 taster weeks for anybody who attends Glasgow City Council secondary schools. And actually looking at it, it's a program we've been looking at redeveloping for quite a long time, but this has actually given us the opportunity to think, well, how else could we run this program? And instead of, what we've decided to do is, instead of just having 1 week-long on-campus experience where you only have that one kind of one-off input, we're actually looking at sort of sustained contact throughout the year. So maybe looking at, instead of a 1 week program, maybe bringing students onto campus for maybe 10 afternoons throughout the course of the year, which we kind of hope will help a lot of the students who do leave at the end of S4 and S5, because by the time you get to the June of your S4 or S5 year, you're really in the following year, and a lot of the students who were thinking about leaving will have left by that point. So we're hoping that actually by running the programs during the course of the year, we can help to increase the number of students who are maybe on the fence about going to higher education or staying on in school, to actually help them make that decision by being there kind of consistently rather than waiting till the end of the year. And for those who are in S5, we will also include the completion of the academic skills module that we do as part of the summer school. So a lot of that activity, these are the things that we're planning to do, because a lot of the disruption was really for activity that we were planning in June or over the course of the summer. But for the top-up program, which I will let Kirsten go into, she's the top-up program coordinator, the big disruption was really in March, just as the lockdown went into effect. So we're in the situation, we've actually done the things that we're planning on doing, and we also have the kind of feedback and the results to say how it worked, and we've got the lessons that we've learned from it. So I will pass over to Kirsten, who can talk you through what the kind of main challenges were and how the team responded.
Hi everybody, I'll try and get through this as quickly as possible. So luckily we were able to maintain all of our on-campus activity, which is assessed. So that had all taken place, thankfully. But what was left really for about circa 400 pupils was the actual writing of their assessed assignment. And that was really challenging because they were thinking that they were going to be able to do this with the support of their tutors in school. But all of a sudden that was taken away from them, and we had to think of a way of how we were going to help these young people complete the programme, because the top-up programme isn't just for entry into the University of Glasgow. We have partnership agreements with universities across Scotland, so it was to help these young people take up their university place wherever it was offered. And we were really concerned for these young people about how they were going to access digital platforms, how they were going to maintain contact with their tutors, and it was just, yeah, it was a bit of a nightmare. So as a kind of immediate response, we emailed out all of the pupils and with a short PowerPoint saying, these are where your resources are located in the handbooks that we've given you. More help is going to be on the way. Please stick with the programme. We're going to get to you. So that was the initial, just like straight out as soon as we knew that the schools were closing. We thought about what was the most accessible platform that we could use to reach these young people. And basically, Monica and I cooked up using Instagram television as a way of being able to launch instructional videos that were going to help the young people complete their written assignments. And that also meant that we could use subtitles and things like that for those instructional videos, and also host an online question and answer session. And that was phenomenally used. Actually, it was a great success. And also that could be accessed, importantly, that could be accessed using just mobile phone technology. And we knew that that was going to be the most accessible and the quickest way for us to reach this cohort of learners. We gave out our email address and said somebody will be available between these particular time periods to answer any email support. And also my mobile number was there, so students, if they would rather phone somebody and speak to somebody, they could call me. And we also kept all of our contact teachers who we work closely with in schools up to date with what we were doing. So if pupils went to them and said, look, I don't know what's happening, that the contact teachers would be able to support what was happening and be able to inform. So we contacted 400 learners. About 100 of those learners came back to us and said, look, we started the programme but we're not intending to complete because of various other reasons. We're actually going to come to the University of Glasgow Summer School instead, or whatever. So that took us down to about 300 learners, and out of those 300 learners, 226 pupils actually submitted their written assignments, which was fantastic. You can see the numbers there from the views of the videos that we put up, and who used email support and stuff. So we were thrilled that the students really wanted to complete the programme and that they were going to utilise all the supports available to them, which is quite brave really, because this is not how they were expecting to complete. I think on reflection, the learning for the top-up team was that, you know, the motivation from the pupils was there, and that was something we were really proud of. Social media platforms can, as sometimes, are a bit of a distraction and a hindrance, but in this case they were extraordinarily helpful. We will definitely be looking to use Twitter and Instagram and YouTube going forward a wee bit more. What we are going to have to do though is train our Widening Participation tutor cohort to tutor over these platforms, and so that's a summer programme that Monica and I are looking at just now, about how we're going to train our tutors up to use online learning and online teaching. And learning for us, we were able to adapt quickly in a really stressful and fluid situation. But we're only able to do that because of the expertise that was within the Widening Participation team, and that's us looking at our own training and our own development as well, thinking about what could we do, but could we have done anything better? Do we need more training and learning? And we have sent out an evaluation to the programme participants that had to use the online version for their written assignments, and we're going to look at that feedback very, very closely to find out what else we could have done better, so going forward we can really develop and use this as an opportunity really to push the programme forward.
So that's kind of really in a nutshell just how we've kind of tried to handle what's happened. Like we said, it's possibly the worst month that's been impacted for us, because I think at one point we did do the math that in the month of June we normally have anywhere between 100 and 500 students on campus every single day.
Yeah,
every day. So it's been a lot of work just basically trying to think, well, how do we replicate all of this activity or as best as we can, so that we don't, so that our participants aren't negatively impacted upon by this and they're not missing out on kind of really critical experiences.
Thank you so much. I've said it before over email to you, but I cannot possibly express how lucky I feel to work at Glasgow when we've got you guys, because the amount of work that you do and it's just astonishing. The numbers and the extent of what you do. Thank you so much for doing that. I'm actually gonna skip the questions just for now because I'm conscious of the time. So what we'll do is we'll maybe come back at the end. I think there was actually a lot of the questions as they were coming up you were then answering, but we'll come back to that at the end just so that we don't go too far over, because I know people have got different meetings and stuff. But yes, thank you so much. That was
very happy to be involved, so no, thank you very much.
In a way, but very interesting. Thank you. Okay, so let me just get my various. I'm going to stop the recording and start it again because I have remembered. Well done me.